I recently filmed my first MMA fight, and although that definitely doesn't make me an expert, it was a very valuable learning experience, and I know a lot more leaving the event than I did going in. So today I'm going to talk to you about 5 tips that you can apply to your work if you're going to go film any combat sports. So the 5 things we're going to talk about today are frame rates, focusing, exposure, lenses, and key moments to capture. And oh, by the way, if you're new to the channel, my name is Peter Sarellas. I film sports videos and make tutorials about them and put them on this YouTube channel for you. So if that sounds like something that's up your alley, please consider watching to the end of this video and potentially subscribing. But let's get into frame rates. Frame rates was a really counterintuitive thing for me filming fighting because the sport that I film primarily, which is football nowadays, I like using 60 or 120 frames per second and overcranking my shutter to 1/320 or 1/400 most of the time. But for fighting, I found that I actually like filming in 24 frames per second most of the time, a lot more than slow motion. I know I film a lot in slow-mo when I talk about the importance of slow-mo in sports, but hear me out. I think that the motion blur that comes with filming in 24 frames per second makes the strikes from fighters look so much more fast and intense. And a lot of the time, there are actually logistical issues with filming slow motion in a fighting venue around a ring. I found that when I was filming at this event, there were a lot of lights that would give me banding if I started filming in slow motion and pointed my camera in the wrong direction. And the easiest way to avoid that banding was filming in 24 frames per second with 1/50 shutter speed. Filming in slow motion, I'm not saying is something you shouldn't do when you're filming fighting, because you can get some really epic moments filming in slow motion for mixed martial arts or combat sports. There's not much cooler than a guy punching another guy in the face in 120 frames per second and just seeing their entire face jiggle as the strike happens. It's really oddly satisfying in my opinion, but maybe there's something wrong with me. You need to be careful with when you use slow motion because, like I said, you could get banding, but also you're going to eat up a ton of card space filming everything in slow motion, because unlike football, where as the team moves down the field and gets closer to the end zone, it becomes more likely they're going to score, and so the big play is more likely to happen and you can switch to filming slow motion. When you're filming fighting, you don't know when the big moment is going to happen. Someone can knock someone out of the blue when you're not ready for it, or you can film an entire fight in slow motion waiting for that big moment and it could never happen. I like to pick my moments when I'm filming slow motion. Usually this was in the first few minutes of the fight or in the second half of the final round of a fight, because I found that there would always be someone who either came out hot looking to end the fight early, or when you get to the end of the fight, one fighter realizes they're down on the judges' scorecards and they have to win with a knockout and they get really aggressive. And you get a lot of action in these types of moments. Now, I film almost everything for sports with autofocus. The autofocus on the Sony cameras that I use nowadays is so good that there's almost no need to manual focus with them at all. It's just excellent, even if I'm filming football with cages and visors in front of players' eyes. But for MMA, that just doesn't go. I found myself using a really good mix of manual focus and autofocus, and this is mostly because of the cage. If you're using an autofocus lens and aren't filming correctly, you're gonna get your autofocus picking up on the cage a lot of the time instead of the fighters, even with eye tracking. And you're not really going to be able to think about composing great shots if you're just fighting with your autofocus all the time. So I would suggest that if you're going to film close to the cage, you look to get a lens like this that has a minimum focusing distance. So you can see right here, I have the option to either film in full, which uses the full focal range of my lens, or you can switch to, well, this lens has a macro switch, but you can switch to 3 meters to infinity, and turning this switch on will make sure that you don't focus on anything that is closer than 3 meters to you. So if you're filming MMA and the fighters are in the middle of the ring and the cage is right next to you, as long as those fighters are more than 3 meters away and the cage is less than 3 meters away, your autofocus won't pick up on the cage. So that's really useful. It's also good for sports like baseball, where you're filming behind a net or a cage a lot of the time. And if you don't have this type of switch on your lens, you can always get your lens really close to the cage and turn on autofocus. As long as the cage is closer than the minimum focusing distance of the lens that you're using, then your autofocus still won't pick up the cage and will instead pick up the fighters. Though there is value in manual focusing, like I said, and I did manual focus for most of this event, because the cage can actually look pretty cool in the foreground of your shots. It's a very important element of mixed martial arts, and you want to be showcasing it, and it can just give you a more interesting look in the stuff that you're filming. Now, I filmed this entire event on my FX3 and A7 IV in S-Log3, and I realized only when I got back to my computer and was color grading my footage that I had exposed the fighters in the ring perfectly. But because the ring is so small and so bright and so close to everything else, the out of focus areas and the areas outside of the ring were severely underexposed. And because of this, there was tons of noise in the background of pretty much all of my shots. It was to the point that I had to do some pretty heavy denoising and even mask around some of the darker areas so that I could crush the blacks and get rid of that noise. And even though everything in the ring was exposed perfectly, the edges of the shot just looked really bad without this correction. I think this is because when I was filming this event, you're getting really bright stage lights essentially on the ring or the octagon or whatever it is. And then the crowd is so close to the ring and the fighters. If I'm filming football, I have really bright floodlights lighting up the field, but we're also outside, so there's natural light on the crowd, and the crowd's really far away and really out of focus because the field is so big. So this isn't ever really an issue, and it wasn't something that I was expecting filming mixed martial arts. So the next time I go to film any sort of combat sport, I'm probably going to slightly overexpose the competitors in the ring, as long as I'm not losing any actual detail. That way, the exposure for the background and everything outside of the ring can be a little bit higher, give me a little bit less noise, and make it easier to color grade my footage when I bring it all back. Now, when you're filming cage side, it's probably advisable to use something in the 24 to 70 millimeter range as far as lenses go. And if you're gonna film from further back or from a balcony above the ring possibly, then something more telephoto like a 70 to 200 millimeter lens could be a really good bet. But because this was my first time filming combat sports, I wanted to keep things pretty simple for myself. So I used the Tamron 35 to 150 millimeter f2 to 2.8 to film pretty much all of my action shots. At 35 mil, it was wide enough that I could get some really good stuff cage side. And then being in the balcony and filming from further away, 150 millimeters was plenty to make sure I was still getting some good shots. I do see some value in potentially getting something super telephoto like a 70 to 200 or even a 100 to 400 or 200 to 600 to get really tight shots of fighters' eyes as they're preparing to start the fight, or get some detailed shots of their gloves or anything like that. Really, it could be valuable, but it wasn't something that I was about to do on my very first time filming, when I just wanted to make sure I was capturing the action properly. I did also bring my 20 millimeter lens, which is the Sony 20mm f1.8. I put that on a gimbal with my Sony A7 IV and got some nice establishing shots. But besides that, it was a pretty light setup, and I was pretty happy with the way everything turned out filming with those two lenses. Obviously, everyone wants to film somebody punching in the face if you're filming a fight. But one of the most important things to think about is all those other moments in between rounds. Things like getting a fighter sitting down on a stool cage side with blood or sweat dripping down his face as his coaches are talking to him. Or logos and branding around the cage on the ring announcer's microphone possibly. The cage door closing as a fighter prepares for action. These are all really valuable tools to tell the story of the fight night, and aren't necessarily the first thing that you're gonna think of. For my first fights filming this, I wasn't even worried about that. I was just filming action. And then as I kind of settled in, I realized, oh yeah, there are all these really cool moments I'm seeing between the fights. And once I understood the flow of how a fight went and when they took breaks and where fighters went at different times, then I was able to set myself up properly to film those types of moments. And they're really what tie everything together for me, and I think separate good videographers from great videographers, whether you're filming combat sports or football or basketball or literally anything else. If you have any tips on how to film mixed martial arts or combat sports, you've done that type of thing in the past, drop it down in the comment section. I'd love to chat with you down there and pick your brain a little bit as I kind of start filming this new type of sport, which I hope to film much more of going forward. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel because I post videography and video editing tips and tutorial videos similar to this on a regular basis, and would love to have you around for that. And yeah, that's gonna be it. So until next time, peace.